Welcome to the first in our two-lecture series on ethical guidelines in psychology. And this is a topic that we'll keep discussing as we go through the course. In this lecture, we're going to just discuss some of the basic ways in which ethical guidelines inform psychological practice and the ways in which they constrain it. My name is Chris Gall, and I wrote today's lecture. Today's lecture is based on the College Board's course outline for AP Psychology version 1. This is the final series of lectures for Unit 1 on the scientific foundations of psychology. After this, we'll be moving on to Unit 2, the biological foundations of psychology, and be talking about the anatomy of the brain and the nervous system. So, according to the College Board, the learning target for this lesson is that you will be able to identify how ethical issues inform and constrain research practices. Ethics inform research by channeling it away from certain behaviors, for example, things that might cause a mild injury to someone, and by limiting it from engaging in certain practices, for example, torturing people. At the end of the day, they help us to determine what is and is not an appropriate topic for research. So before we begin, we really should define some of our terms. Ethics, according to dictionary.com, is the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. Okay. For psychology, ethics are those things that guide research and the care that psychologists provide. Ethics in psychology are similar to those in medicine in that they involve not harming people unnecessarily, of making sure that people give informed consent for their participation or for their treatment or participation in studies, that their privacy is protected, and that when participating in studies, they are debriefed after their participation to ensure that no harm is given, and that they are told about anything that went on that they were not originally told about. For obvious reasons in psychological research, sometimes some mild lies are told to preserve the integrity of the study. Those lies are then revealed during the debrief, and psychologists check in with participants to ensure that either no harm was done, or that if harm was done, that they offset it however they can. Ethics in care govern things like the appropriate relationships between therapists and clients, how records are kept, and what types of treatment are appropriate in a given situation. So when we talk about ethics, they're really what allow us to make the right decision in hard situations, along with easy situations. So it's easy, I hope, to know that you should not design research that involves physically or emotionally torturing someone. It's harder to know exactly what someone else might find emotionally torturing. So this is where the ethics really comes in, right? It helps us kind of decide where is that line. So if you ask someone to push buttons that give an electrical shock to someone else in increasing increments up past the point where that person knows or thinks that they're causing physical harm and maybe even torturing somebody, right? Is that ethical? Decisions about what is or is not ethical change across time as we have more experience to guide our choices. So on the next slide, we're going to look at a video from 50 years ago, and I want you to watch the video, and then when you're done, go ahead and pause it and just ask yourself the questions, was this experiment ethical? Okay, why or why not?
A decade earlier, psychologist Stanley Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Where? Teacher.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud, horse, rock, house. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer, horse.
Experiment, that's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
You refuse to go on?
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
Oh. I can't stand the pain. Let me out of
Can't
here.
stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man there. I mean, who's gonna take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
2/3 of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering for less voltage. Can't you check in and see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
Okay, so go ahead and pause here for a moment and just think to yourself, was the experiment ethical? Okay, and it's worth remembering that what I said about ethical standards changing across time, place, and situation, which is to say that they do, right? So this particular video clip is from an experiment done in the early 1960s, the Milgram obedience experiment. Is it possible that what was considered ethical in the 1960s might not be considered ethical now? That what might have changed in the meantime that might mean this experiment would no longer be allowed to move forward? Okay, so welcome to the end of our lecture. You've successfully learned, hopefully, what you needed to from today's lecture if you understood what ethics are and then what role they play in our lives, and if you can explain what types of things are covered by ethical guidelines. Then taken a look at an experiment and applied your understanding of ethics to it to help you decide if a given situation is ethical or not. So if you didn't understand those things, now would be a good time to go back and rewatch all or part of this video. If you still have questions about it, feel free to bring those into class and we can discuss them. So I'll see you in the next class or in the next lecture. So until then, go forth and be ethical.